right now, and I don't need to tell you guys, the whole country knows it, retail is challenged, and it's challenged from Florida to Washington State. So we are being very, very selective in the retail that we do, and we're actually focusing more on residential at this point. They came out with an announcement in the last week saying we are, quote, right-sizing, and right-sizing down to 75,000 square feet, which means every shopping center owner who has one has a 25,000-foot box, or hole, rather, in his shopping center. Yes, Kohl's is paying rent, but anytime a tenant is paying rent on space it's not using, that if you're careful and prudent as an owner, as a developer, that should make you worry and stay up at night. You know, it's the sword of Damocles hanging over your center.
This is Eric Odom of the Invest Florida Real Estate Show. For all of you Tampa folks, I just wanted to talk briefly about Suites at Madison. Suites at Madison is a place to conduct business, whether it is for an hour or a month. This is the place to get your work done. This is where we hold all of our networking meetings. This is where we host our podcast, but we're not the only ones who use the office. Title companies use the conference for closings. Real estate companies host their sales meetings here. Attorneys use the space for depositions. There was even a Canadian company recently who used one of the offices for a couple of months while they were setting up their permanent office in the Tampa area. So if you need a quiet place to get away for a few hours or weeks or months, or to meet a client privately, check out www.downtowntampaoffice.com to see what the deal is. Oh, and you can also sign up for our regular networking events there, so go check it out. Now, let's go on to the show.
You are listening to the Invest Florida Real Estate Show, covering topics in lending, buy and sell strategies, property management, hot markets, and tips and tools to guide you along the way on your path to real estate success. You want Florida investment real estate talk? You have come to the right place. And now, our hosts, Eric Odom and Steven Silverman.
And it's that time again for another episode of the Invest Florida Real Estate Show. This is your co-host, Eric Odom, along with Steven Silverman. Steven.
Well, thanks for the growl, Eric. It's been an interesting couple of weeks. You know, we're both active out in the market, both helping our clients find spaces or lease spaces and property management. Retail's been changing, and so I'm looking forward to the speaker that we have today because to look at it from a development perspective.
Yeah, we, it's part of there's the nature of the beast. We have undergone quite a bit of growth on the property management side. It's those individuals that buy property from us and they live someplace else and they want us to take care of the property for them, and so that they just get a check at the end of the month, and that's fine. We do that, but it definitely has been. We've added a number of clients in that arena recently, and it's time for us to add another property manager. Steven, I think it's time for maybe we ask some of our listeners if they know anybody out there that maybe they can forward to us. Because
great idea, guys. If you know anybody that you think could help us and that is good at that kind of work, please let us know.
Yeah, it's tough to find good folks. It's property management can be pretty strenuous endeavor. It can be kind of stressful, but the property managers that are good at it are worth their weight in gold. So we would appreciate it if you guys would go to the Invest Florida Show and let us know if anybody out there could be a good candidate for us. Steven, we had a great review recently.
Was it anything to do with the show?
It was. And it was on Stitcher. I haven't looked at Stitcher for a while because we've been getting good reviews on iTunes and the Google Play Store pretty consistently. Or people have been sending us emails and we've been reading those reviews. But Richard Tejada says, slam dunk. He was at Stitcher, I was going to say, because I haven't looked at Stitcher for a while. Slam dunk. These guys are great. I first met Eric at an REIA meeting and learned of this show. I like learning from them and their guests, and they are down to earth and keep things light. Augie's episode was great, Augie Violet. I don't have to worry about falling asleep in the car anymore. Love your show. Thank you. Signed, Richard. Richard, that is very much appreciated. We love it when our listeners give us reviews and give us some feedback. And believe me, it helps you guys too. Right,
and we love to keep the roads safe. So
no, but it definitely helps us too, because it helps you, because our guests will go and look at the reviews and make sure that people are paying attention, because everybody's business. Everybody comes on the show. The guy we're having today, and it's no different from any other speakers we have, to try to get them on the schedule is not easy. These are guys that have very, very full schedules, and they want to make sure if they're going to invest 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour with us, that it's actually going to be something that's meaningful. So when you guys leave reviews, it helps us to help you. We appreciate you, Richard, for leaving that review.
And before we start, please remember also, if you have any suggestions for guests, we've got some great suggestions from our listeners. It makes it more interesting for all of us. We all learn a lot more.
Yeah, we've had some terrific referrals on folks. We had a referral last week, I believe, what came from one of our listeners down in Miami. Dan Pepper, of course, here in Tampa, has been just a fountain of resources for us in terms of getting guests on the show. Guys, for every guest that we get, we probably talk to 10 to 15 people, because not everybody has the time to be able to come on the show, and it's a challenge.
Or is really a good candidate.
Or is a good candidate. So there's a lot of filter process here, and it's not just as simple as us making a telephone call and getting someone to come on the show. It is a challenge. So you guys can keep those referrals coming. We'll definitely go through them and try to make contact and get that speaker on. Stephen, is there anything else before we get rolling on the show today?
The retail world is changing, and I think the show today is super important for anybody in real estate.
Terrific. Guys, let's get rolling with the show.
Today we have with us John McNellis. John is the founder of McNellis Partners, which specializes in developing supermarket-anchored shopping centers in Northern California. He is a graduate of the University of California, Berkeley, and of the University of California, Hastings Law College. John is a frequent lecturer and writer. He gives presentations before the ULI, ICSC, NAOP, and writes a monthly real estate column for the Registry magazine. He is the author of Making It in Real Estate, Starting Out as a Developer, which is a critically acclaimed book that sets out the basics of real estate development in a straightforward and amusing way. John, welcome to the Invest Florida show.
Well, and thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
And John, we really appreciate you investing the time with us today. Can you kind of give us maybe a 30,000-foot view of how you got into the real estate game and then how you got into the development game?
Sure, happy to. Mid-'70s, I was a young lawyer at a high-end San Francisco law firm. I started, like most kids who go into law, wanting to be a litigator. You wanted to be Perry Mason, go to court, snap the suspenders. And I quickly realized that I hated litigation, that it was a soul-killing waste of time, and I was fortunate that my firm had a real estate department. So I begged the partners. They allowed me to shift over into being a real estate business lawyer. And then, quickly enough, it seemed like 24 hours, but it was probably some months, I decided it looked like a whole lot more fun to be a developer and to be on the business side than to be a lawyer. So gradually, over a number of years, and I did practice law for a number of years, I shifted over to becoming a developer. And the way I became a shopping center developer, which has been our specialty for 35 years, I had an older client who was an accomplished shopping center developer who needed a partner. And that's how I got here today.
And so you're doing primarily retail now. Have you done other asset classes as well, John?
I have, and that's a little bit misleading. Right now, we have done office and we have done multifamily, and in an ancient history, we did a little bit of industrial. But right now, and I don't need to tell you guys, the whole country knows it, retail is challenged, and it's challenged from Florida to Washington State. So we are being very, very selective in the retail that we do, and we're actually focusing more on residential at this point.
Let's talk a little bit about the retail challenge. And we know the internet is affecting the big box, and but there are still some sectors, that grocery, for example, and medtail, that are medical retail, that are still working. Do you see any glimmer of hope on the retail side?
Sure. Put it this way, nobody's losing weight, right? And nobody's spending less money. So that the money is being spent, the food is being purchased. The problem, and you alluded to it, it's partially the internet, but it's more, again, from coast to coast. We have an enormous overbuilding of retail space. You know, the statistic, the factoid that one hears is that we have 50 square feet of retail space for every man, woman, and child in the country. Europe, by comparison, has 2 or 3 feet. So you combine the overbuilding with the internet, and just as a sidebar, what's interesting about the internet and e-commerce is that nobody from Amazon on down is really making money at it. Amazon has for $99 you get the Prime delivery. Well, it costs $10 to $15 to deliver whatever, a pair of shoes, a book,
sure,
to you or me. And so Amazon, from the start, has been losing money, gaining incredible market share, but losing money or making the slimmest margin. But Amazon's got to the point where, you know, it is the biggest gorilla in the room. What's happening, and then Walmart on the other side has been historically the finest bricks and mortar retailer. The two are meeting in the middle. You guys have probably noticed Amazon is opening bookstores left and right. It's opening little markets, and of course it bought Whole Foods.
Yep.
Now, if it was making a ton of money in e-commerce, it wouldn't be doing that. So Amazon, you know, we're going to end up in the middle. But in that middle, what happens, and I see this almost weekly from the big retailers that I deal with, the retailers are downsizing. So, for example, Kohl's, are they in Florida?
Yep, Kohl's in Florida. Yep.
Kohl's departments. So Kohl's, it runs about 100,000 square feet. They came out with an announcement in the last week saying we are, quote, right-sizing, and right-sizing down to 75,000 square feet, which means every shopping center owner who has one has a 25,000-foot box, or hole, rather, in his shopping center. Yes, Kohl's is paying rent, but anytime a tenant is paying rent on space it's not using, that if you're careful and prudent as an owner, as a developer, that should make you worry and stay up at night. You know, it's the sword of Damocles hanging over your center. So ultimately, I think retail gets right-sized. The internet and retail come together, and everything's going to be okay. But there's going to be a lot of pain between now and then.
Mm-hmm. So, John, closely related to all that is just another segment, which is the industrial, and that's distribution, which is really, to some extent, benefiting from all this, or is certainly affected by all that's going on with retail. And do you see any development opportunities in industrial? Have you done anything in that area?
You know, we didn't have great luck with industrial up in the early 90s. We did a couple of deals, and they one was a KISS sister, and the other we barely made any money on. So I haven't focused on it. But industrial is the beneficiary, you correctly pointed out, of the internet. And I think industrial is probably the tightest market across the country. My friends who do it have these big Cheshire cat grins right now. They're doing extraordinarily well. Their complaint is that they just can't find land. You know, it's hard, but industrial is probably, of the various subspecies of real estate, industrial is probably the best place to be right now, and that's countrywide.
And what's interesting about industrial, it's a broad brush. So, you know, when we think of industrial, we really think of manufacturing, but actually manufacturing, when I look at the statistics, isn't increasing. It's all distribution. Yes,
that's right. And manufacturing, as I'm sure you're aware, typically manufacturing facilities are built and owned by the manufacturing company itself. You don't often have a developer in between the way you do with distribution or pure warehouse.
Right. John, it's somebody looking from the outside in at a developer and how developments are done. It's like a Rubik's Cube. It's a puzzle of trying to put together a deal. And it can be really complicated, and, you know, you probably turn over 10 deals before you find one. It's probably more than that, before you find one that actually works. Of all the things that are out there that are developing challenging, how would you classify the top, say, 3? Is that from government to actually finding the dirt, to getting financing, to dealing with the government regulations. What would you consider like maybe the top three and why?
Well, first of all, I'd say as a general rule, it's never exactly right. There's never plenty of tenants, plenty of cheap land, plenty of easy zoning, and plenty of money. That never happens. One or two or three factors are always out of whack. I would say historically and today more so than ever, the hardest part is finding a deal that makes sense. I think that's always the case. And then I will also say same thing today. The easiest part, and young guys starting out in the business don't believe me when I say this because it just seems so hard, but the easiest part is raising money, is finding the equity.
Yep.
And I say that, and if I could impress anything on your listeners today, I would say, guys, there are trillions of dollars sloshing around in banks getting essentially 0% interest. There are lots of guys with a ton of money who want to be players, who want to be partners, who want to tell their friends at the country club that, oh yeah, I'm in this deal. I put in $100,000. They act like a big shot. If you, as a young developer or an investor, can find a deal that has a reasonably safe and has a decent rate of return, I guarantee you can raise the equity on it. That's the easiest part. Governmental regulation varies wildly from state to state, and then within states from city to county, city to city. But the flip side, so I'm in Northern California, which is among the most heavily regulated areas. The reason I like that, and let's just compare Northern California, say San Francisco, which is extraordinarily difficult to develop in, on the one hand, and Houston to the other, which, as I'm sure you both know, has no zoning. So in Houston, you can come up with anything you want, an industrial project, a hotel, a dog daycare facility, and you can build it anywhere you want. The only thing you have to file for is a building permit. So there's a great beauty to that. You can buy your land and be under construction in 6 months, but there's also a terrific downside. You can get blindsided. You can open in my case, your shopping center on day one on one corner, and then 6 months later, someone else breaks ground across the street from you with a slightly bigger, slightly shinier shopping center. There are no barriers to entry. So you run the risk of overbuilding, time and time again. Conversely, in San Francisco or my hometown, Palo Alto, it's almost impossible to build. It takes you years to get things approved, but once you are approved, you're kind of inside the moat. There's a significant barrier to entry, much better value retention. So it's tough if you're starting out, you say, gee, this is just too hard for me to develop in let's say, Miami. Let's say Miami's difficult, and I'd rather go out, someplace where it's easy. That's not a bad idea, but you have to be careful. And in fact, guys, when we develop in areas with low barriers to entry, we almost always sell. We say, this property's best moment, its shiniest moment, is the day of the grand opening when it's 100% leased. The paint looks good, and we sell it. And again, conversely, where we're in a inner Bay Area location, a San Francisco type location, we'll keep it for the long term because we know we're safe.
Interesting strategy. John, when you go outside of the Bay Area to do development, are you hiring typically a consultant, a governmental consultant, an attorney to kind of help you guide you through the different regulatory labyrinth that you're developing in?
That's a great question. Usually outside the Bay Area, and we don't do a lot, it's pretty much a town-by-town basis. If a town is notoriously difficult and there is one, say, lawyer or one entitlements consultant that is really well known for speeding projects through, we would hire them. We typically do the entitlements ourselves. I have found that cities, city councils, planning commissions react better when you stand up at the meeting and say, folks, I'm the owner. I'm here. I'm committed to this project. I'm going to get it done. That tends to play better, particularly if you have a good project, than hiring that entitlements guy who appears before the city council every 2 weeks And sure, he's smooth and slick, but the council has heard him so many times. Another thing I would impress on young developers, even if you're a poor public speaker, even if your hands shake and your voice quakes, get up and represent yourself. That sincerity, if you stand up and say, even in a shaking voice, I'm the owner, folks, but I'm going to build a wonderful project, you gain the sympathy of a city council or a planning commission, as opposed to some slick professional who might be a little bit jaded with the whole process.
So John, can you give us, I know that every deal is different. Can you give an anatomy of a deal? If, for instance, when you go in, do you find it's better? Do you start off with a piece of land and then go looking for the other components? Or do you maybe go in with a tenant and build around them? How do you approach it?
That's another great question. For residential, I think you would start with the land. You say, here's a piece that we can rezone or upzone. So you start with the piece of land. One of the benefits of retail, if you have been in it for a long term, if you think about it, if you do industrial, you might do a deal with an industrial tenant once. If you do an office building, you might do a deal with that same tenant maybe once or twice.
Yeah.
In retail, we have relationships that go back from my mid-20s and nearly 40 years. We've been working with Safeway, a wonderful supermarket chain, since I was a young lawyer, so quite literally 40 years. We've been working with Walmart, with Ross, with Grocery Outlet, with just a number of tenants, Starbucks, and the smaller tenants too. So to answer your question, sometimes it goes the other way where like we're one of Walmart's preferred developers and Grocery Outlet's preferred developers. They say, you see them at an industry conference, the ICSC, or you go to their offices, have lunch, or you're just chatting on the phone, and you say, where would you like to go in Northern California? And they say, we really need a presence in Modesto. So in retail, you can start with a tenant, but you can't do that overnight. That comes with 10, 15, 20 years experience. But that tends to make it easier. So you have a tenant in mind. Okay, it's Walmart, and let's say it's 100,000 feet, so you need 10 acres. So you've got that as part of your equation, and then you go out and you know the city, and then you just figure out the best intersection, best corner, go back to Walmart and say, what do you think? And that works pretty well. But it's not a rookie strategy.
And at that point in time, are you trying to get because rumors spread pretty quickly, and sometimes I've actually had retailers sort of leak through channels that ends up back at the owners that that's being the property's being pushed to to a particular tenant. Are you going in then at that time and trying to tie the property up with a fairly liberal out clause if the tenant doesn't take the deal, or what time at what point are you actually purchasing or putting the contract under a contract?
Great question. What we'd like to do is put the property under contract immediately, and then of course we're fairly well known here in Northern California as shopping center developers, and so a somewhat sophisticated seller would probably deduce by our offer that we had a tenant or tenants in mind, but that's part of the baggage, I guess. We would try to tie it up for the quote free look, 60, 90 days, a little bit longer, and then let's say it's a Walmart, and let's say that Walmart historically has been a little skittish, and so it doesn't want to go hard on its leases. That is, the lease is absolutely binding until it has a building permit. So what we would do in a case like that is get that 90-day initial free look where we do the best assessment we can that we'll be able to obtain all the permits that we need, the zoning that we need, and then offer the seller, let's make it simple. Let's say that the price is $5 million, and you say to the seller, look, if I pay you $5 million and the best that you're going to do with that money, forget about the taxes, is putting in the bank I don't know the bank that'll do this, but the best you'll make is 5% or $250,000 a year. So I'll tell you what, give us a year, beyond the free period where we pay you $20,000 a month or whatever, $20,000 and change to equal that $250,000. So you, Mr. Seller, it's like you sold it, but you're not paying the capital gains. But we're paying you this money non-refundable outside of escrow, and it doesn't apply to the purchase price. Our reasoning is we'd rather risk that $250,000 and rather than buy the land for $5 million and then have the whole thing blow up, and then we're sitting on a piece of land that we don't have a tenant for. The real trick to long-term successful development is risk management.
Yeah, that's a terrific idea in terms of tying the property up, but not taking all of your capital and sinking into it. It's sort of an option strategy of controlling, but not having to roll off the wallet for the entire amount.
And has that strategy been successful? I mean, have you found you've had to back out of deals and just leave that on the table?
It's been successful both ways. In other words, it's been successful where during the course we've spent that, say, $250,000, using my example, but at the end of the time, we have obtained all of our permits. We've gone ahead and built the Walmart, and it's all worked out great. And we've just added that $250,000, into our purchase price basis. So instead of $5 million, it's $5,250,000. And it's also worked the other way to protect us, where we had the 90-day free look, and then we spend another 90 days and realize, whoops, we're in a tsunami zone, or whoops, something goes dramatically wrong, right. or the company has had a change of heart and no longer wants this location. So then we can cut our losses. So we went another 90. Let's say then we'd walk away, and which is hard to do, particularly for a young developer. But you've got to learn, discipline, and you take the, let's say, $60,000 loss. Let's say you're another 3 months into it, you walk away from that. So it works very well.
Let me give you a hypothetical, because this is typical of one of one of our listeners. Jillian is a home builder. She's been doing flipping houses and doing small fix and flips, or maybe she owns a handful of properties. She's also been doing some building for third parties as a typical building contractor. And she's found a piece of land to build a multifamily. She wants to do a 200 unit, 300 unit multifamily complex. She's found the perfect piece of dirt, and it makes sense for her to do that. But it's daunting for her to make that next step. What would you say? How would you counsel her to, here's what you need to do from a 30,000 foot view to get the ball rolling?
To go from doing duplexes and fourplexes to 200 units?
Yeah, exactly. So she's got sort of this baseline experience, but now she's taking that next big step. I mean, what are the primary things that you would tell her to look out for? Or maybe you would say, hey, you need to get a partner here. I don't know what your response would be to that, but how would you counsel her? You know
what I think I would do, because that is too big a leap. Okay. I think what I would do is say exactly, you know what, Steve, I think I would say, Jillian, go find a partner. Tell him that you have this fully entitled, and so your price is, I'll make up numbers, your price is $1 million, but since you've got a fully entitled, it's worth $3 million, and say to him, I'll sell it to you for $2.8 million or some kind of discount, and I'm going to stay in, you're going to put up the rest of the money, I'm going to stay in as a partner, and part of the deal is, so I'll take a carried interest in the deal. Part of the deal is I get to attend all the meetings. I get to see all the paperwork. I get to meet the architects and the planners and the engineers. And basically, it's selling it a little bit cheaper is the tuition you pay. And then suddenly she's got on her resume. So they build the project, and she builds it with, let's say, Lennar, or pick any big guy. And I think they would go, if it's a good enough piece of dirt, the guys would go along with this. And then she can say, all right, I've done this. I've seen how it's been done. And she's got on her resume a co-partner 200-unit project. another approach would be just to sell that, take that money, and go to 32 units or 16 or 32 units. But I think going from a fourplex to 200 units, that's a big jump.
Well, John, one of the things you'd spoken about was to fight in your own weight class. Is that kind of what you're alluding to?
Yes. Here's the point, guys. I don't think there's anybody who's done more than a handful of real estate deals who hasn't lost money. And the guys who swear they haven't, frankly, I think they're liars. Real estate is so complicated, and there are so many things that totally outside of our control. It's like weather. There can be as you know, they call it a black swan event overseas. Something, or the market can crash on you. What happened in 2009? The commercial market dropped 40%. So anybody, if Warren Buffett and Albert Einstein got together and had deals that they did from 2005, 6, 7, they lost money. So what I mean by fighting in your weight class is, and I did this actually myself. If you go from a duplex to a fourplex to a larger number of units, and then to an industrial property, you're going from 100,000. I think I went up from 100,000 to maybe, and this is in the 80s, the 70s, early 80s, up to the better part of 20 million. If each time you do a deal and it gets larger and larger, and if it's like you're playing blackjack and you're letting it ride. I won one, I'm going to win another. I'm doubling my money. I keep doubling my money. At some point, you're going to lose the whole thing. So if you fight your way, it's more if you get comfortable, let's say in $1 million deal range, and if you do 10 of those in a row, and you lose money one every 10 times, which maybe that's close to normal. On the 10th deal, you're just going to bruise your ego, but you still made a ton of money. But if that 10th deal is 10 times bigger than the first one, you've gone broke. That's kind of what I meant. But that said, if you're ambitious, you work your way up. But I don't think you go from a duplex to 200 units. That's a big jump.
And John, where are we right now in this cycle with each one of these asset classes? What are you guys actively doing? You think there's still opportunity, and where you say you already talked about retail, that you kind of feel like there's still opportunity but limited. And how about the other asset classes?
Well, I can, for the most part, speak most knowledgeably about California. Industrial, I think, is strong nationwide. I think you're still in the middle of the game. Residential, it feels like it's peaked, but the national economic numbers keep coming back strong. And California, for example, we are building 100,000 fewer dwelling units each year than is necessary just to keep up with the population growth, not even to address our housing shortage. So I think housing remains strong for a while. But, everything is hot until suddenly it isn't. We tend to be cautious. And, the old joke, I think I predicted 5 out of the last 2 recessions. So we're always kind of wondering, when it stops. But you basically just follow job growth. Everything else goes off of that. So if you're thinking about starting out in an area or investing in an area, you just look at past job growth and then what's the future potential for job growth. I think a big mistake a lot of people make is building in areas that have no growth, or worse yet, some of the Rust Belt, where the cities are losing population. Mm-hmm. There's no way to make money in a place like that on a long-term basis.
So if somebody wanted to develop, what's your thoughts about being opportunistic and going off into different directions, or specializing and just choosing one niche and staying with that?
I think that it depends where. If you're in a kind of a lightly populated suburban area, or to make the point a little more strongly, if you're in a rural area, I think you have to be a jack of all trades. I think you have to, if you see a chance to do a trailer park, you do it. If you see a chance to do a motel, you do it. If you see a chance to do a couple of houses, you do it. And that's just how it's just like doctors and lawyers they have to do everything in a rural area. If you're in a highly competitive area with sophisticated players, I think the biggest mistake a young developer can make is not to specialize. The best developers in the best locations are as highly specialized as the best doctors and lawyers. People only do 100 to 200 unit apartment houses, let's say. We historically, basically we did 100,000 square foot neighborhood shopping centers. That's a typical 10-acre center. In the old days, it had a supermarket and a drugstore and then a gas station on the corner and a bank. 100,000 feet on 10 acres. That was our sweet spot. And so we were both product specialized and geographically specialized. And our geographic specialty was a 2-hour drive from, say, San Francisco. So in a tight area like that, with a tight product type, we could be very competitive. But I think it's a mistake to try, if you're in Miami, or if you're in New York or San Francisco, or any high-end town, to try to do too many things. You can't master it.
John, when you're looking at a deal, do you have a return threshold that you say, if I don't earn X, that's not worth my time?
Yes, I absolutely do. When I started in the business, what developers wanted to get was an 11% return on total cost, and that's the land, building, it's everything, on day one of 100% lease up. So 11% higher total return on cost, because in those days, property sold at about a 9%. Uh-huh. So the idea was that you would develop at 2% higher, or your return would be 2% higher than the return at which you could sell it. And that 2%, that's still the hallmark, except cap rates have dropped so dramatically, and prices have increased so much that apartment buildings, good apartment buildings, are selling in major urban areas in the 4 range, 4.5. So if you take that same metric, you can develop to a 6.5 return on total cost and still come out fine. Mm-hmm. Where developers get into trouble is when it gets highly competitive and they say, all right, this apartment project, I know it'll sell for 4.5, so I'm willing to develop it at 5, 5.5, 5.25. And so only 1%, say, or even less than 1% spread, where they can go broke, and it happens. It hasn't happened in a while, but it will come back. And then cap rates suddenly rise and prices fall, and then they get wiped out. That often happens to the merchant builders. They don't have enough of a spread. So the short answer is we look for a 2% return over where we think we can sell the project when it's completed.
Right. Depending on the cap rate, that could be, between 9 and 11. It's not as, it's a lot more substantive.
Oh, yeah, that's ancient history. Yeah. So cap rates on retail,
of course,
are anywhere from, let's say, 5.5 to, for the quality stuff, to the 7.5. So you just add 2% to that.
And do you have any strategies for just protecting yourself on the downside when you go out and develop a new property?
Yeah, because these are long-term deals. I mean, it could take a couple of years to get something rolling. And in the meantime, interest rates could flip around. The market could flip around. There's a lot of exposure there, a time exposure there. So, what Stephen's question is, I'm curious how you deal with it.
That's back to the point that sooner or later you lose money. There is a lot of exposure. So the problem with what I and you guys just jumped on it like a couple of hungry hyenas. The problem with
Eric says
with what I just outlined is that from the time, if a deal moves at warp speed from the time you see the ground till the time it's done and you can sell it, lightning speed is like 3 years, right? Because you've got to tie it up, get it entitled, do the working drawings, a year to build it, get it all done, and then sell it. 2 to 3 years is as fast as you can go, and 4 to 5 years is more typical. So things can change on you. That's why you want that 2% or 200 basis point spread. but yes, you can lose money. How we protect ourselves is that we don't spec build. So one, and two, we use our own equity, and we use a lot of it. And we try, the assets we've held long term, we've been paying down our mortgages. So ideally, and my partners and I, we're fairly cautious, so if we like owning property free and clear, that way, if you have 10 tenants and 9 of them leave, if you own it free and clear, you're still making money. You're not going to be foreclosed upon. It's just your cash flow is going to be interrupted.
How do you find dirt, John? Is it do you have a department or a person inside of your firm, or are you working through a network of brokers? And how do you make it happen?
The way I make it happen is my stage of the career isn't going to help. Deals tend to find us now. Somebody
Gotcha.
joked with me and said, John, a deal has to bite you on the nose, before you're going to do it. Because, we've been doing retail for 35 years, the people will say, hey, John, they'll call me. I'll hear about it. What I would suggest, kind of answering a slightly different question, is how do you make it happen if you're starting out, is that you figure out what specialty you want to go, where you want to develop, which I think the where is the most critical. You pick the right town. Then you pick, let's say, industrial, or you're already in industrial. You find out who the best broker in that town in your specialty, whether it's industrial, office, retail, whatever, and you befriend that broker. You say, Steve, you're the best industrial broker in town. I'm a young developer. I want you to show me stuff. And then Steve will yawn and say, kid, you don't have any money. Why am I going to show you this? And then you, the young guy, say, well, actually, I've got all my frat brothers or guys from my church or my tennis club, and I've got a commitment from each of them for $100,000. So I've got my war chest. I've got my $2 million and my $3 million lined up. So, Steve, you show me stuff, and I am going to close. People make the mistake of trying to go around brokers and trying to do it themselves. That's a waste of time. You want to find the best guy. That there's a broker usually in every town, in every specialty, who's like a grizzly bear in a salmon stream, who's seeing every deal come by, and you can just kind of swack at him. You want, as a young developer, to find that guy and become his best friend and have him show you stuff. That I think is how you find deals.
Now, one final question, and I'll let you go. I know Stephen looks like he's got another question for you. But if, as a young developer,
as long as you like,
guys, as a young developer getting started, how would you recommend that they get started? Maybe they've got a little bit of experience, but they're not completely green behind the ears, but wet behind the ears. But they're still kind of looking for how to get started. So would you recommend that they try to work for a developer? Should they try to maybe find a coach that could help them? How about partnering? Is there some way that you would say this is maybe the best way for them to gain experience and be able to get their feet wet?
Yeah, I have a definite opinion on this, and the answer is none of those. I think if you want to start out as a developer, the best way to do it is to go buy the worst house in the best neighborhood that you can afford, and then buy it and fix it up yourself. Everything that you learn, all the problems you encounter, and all of the skills that you kind of develop, buying and negotiating to buy that house, finding a contractor, or better yet, doing it yourself, finding a tenant, getting the city approvals. If you're doing it yourself and you borrowed money from your family and friends to do it somehow, I think that's the best way to learn it. And the beauty of residential, as opposed to all of the other specialties, is that as long as you're in a good town, residential has a zero vacancy factor.
Yeah.
You may not make as much as you think, but you know that you're going to be able to move it.
Yeah, it's very forgiving.
Again,
yep.
it's a great training wheels deal. But the stuff, and I started with a $24,000 duplex. I mean, it's exactly how I started doing this. And I can remember, and then, I was painting a house and it had a high ceiling, and as I had a roller and the paint was dripping down in my face, and a friend of mine showed up and said, "Hey, John, let's go to the beach." And I said, "No, I got to paint this damn ceiling." And then I thought, okay, this is the last time I personally paint anything. But I learned how to do it, and just fixing up a house, like the same house. I talked my partner, "Hey, let's put a couple windows in here. Let's do this, let's do that." But the same thing that I did then is what I do now. It just has more zeros, and it's a little more complicated, but the basic lessons are there.
That's good advice. So, Stephen, anything else before we let John go?
Yeah, John, I had a question. You mentioned about going yourself to town halls or to talk with the politicians, but one of the obstacles developers often run into is the general public. And do you have any strategies for addressing or talking to them? Because I've been to meetings where they rise up and
pull your arms and legs off.
That's right. And the poor developer just walks out.
Well, that's true. Yes. We haven't gotten around to my book, but I actually address this in that. But just to what you have to do, and it's hard. Before you go to the planning commission or the city council, you have to do an outreach. If it's going to be the least bit controversial, you've got to reach out to the neighbors. I think I gained 10 pounds hosting coffee and cookies and donuts, and meeting with the neighbors and showing them the plans. And showing them, why, and just inviting everybody. And then what you try to do, and they come, they're curious, and you hold it at a local school or park. And then from those who come, you try to cull from them, if that group, those who will be supporters. Because what you really need to be able to do in order to overcome the hostile room is you need some genuine supporters, people who have they don't have a dog in the fight, people who have no economic interest. I mean, if you get the unions to stand up for you and say, "Oh, this is a great project," the city council is going to yawn and say, "Big deal. The union just wants the work." Or if you're putting a daycare center in for a nonprofit, the nonprofit will get up and say, "Oh, yeah, this is a great project." Again, city council's not impressed. But if you can get people from the neighborhood who says, "Steve's project is great. We like it, and I think it's going to be accretive. It's going to really help our neighborhood." If you can get a few of those, will offset like 5 times as many opponents, because the greenest city council member knows how hard it is to get support for a real estate project, and how easy, on the other hand, it is to get opposition.
They complain.
So I think, but there are. I'm probably at the end of my public career. It is hard to go to these meetings and get lambasted by people for 3 hours at the
Yeah, I kind of like what you're doing. It's like you're going to court and selecting your own jury. So you just want to stack the deck a little bit.
You're trying to get some friends there, to help you. And first, the best thing to do, of course, is to start with a good project, because let's face it, guys, a lot of projects shouldn't be built. Mm-hmm. A lot of times those neighbors who are angry, first of all, you have to assume that they're in good faith, and they usually are. They're right. Like, this project is just another stucco piece of junk that shouldn't be built. So if it really is going to cause too much congestion. So if you start with a good project, and then somehow, through this outreach, and then if anybody, here's a tip, anybody does come and speaks on your behalf, if it's a sweet little old lady, then you send her flowers the next day. You send her a box of chocolate. You go visit her, and you make her part of the team, because it's not, as you guys know, it's not just one hearing. If it's contentious, it's 2, 3, 4, 5 hearings before you're through, and you need to get these folks to come back.
Yeah. So I have just one last question before I ask you a little bit about your book, and that is, are you adjusting the way you develop, or you're planning to develop for the future now with the way technology is changing? driverless cars, autonomous vehicles, ride sharing, less needs for parking. Is that something that's on your horizon right now as you think of projects?
Brilliant question. And the answer is, I'm not smart enough to know. I hear all these futurists say that, well, we're not going to need parking garages anymore, for example, or because you can get up at 2 a.m. and have your car drive you 6 hours. There's going to be this real estate boom in the hinterlands. The answer is I don't know. No, we're not. We're doing kind of what the cities are now requiring, like electric charging at our projects, and of course we're adding that. So we're anticipating electric vehicles, but pretty much along the lines of what the cities are asking. Housing, I don't think gets changed that much, and I think I told you, we've shifted our focus over to residential, and we've become much more sparing about retail at this point.
Gotcha.
So, tell us how people can buy your book and learn more about the development cycle, and also let our listeners know how they could reach you if there are any questions they want to ask, or maybe have some deals they can talk to you about.
All right. Yeah. So again, my name is McNellis, McNellis. The simplest way to buy the book is just go to Amazon, type John McNellis, boom, there it is. The reviews have been extraordinarily kind, and you can pick it up on Amazon. And I am john@mcnellis.com is my email address. If your listeners want to send me a question, if I can, I'll answer it. Sometimes I can help. And the book's called Making It in Real Estate, Starting Out as a Developer, published interestingly by the Urban Land Institute, which is the publisher of the Urban Land Institute. I have been involved. I'd recommend to anybody who's serious about the development business joining the ULI, but I've been involved with it since I was 30 years old. Brilliant place to meet the best people in development and to learn the best development practices. I donated 100% of the royalties to the ULI. I don't make anything from the book. And what's happened since it was published about a year ago, it's getting picked up by kind of college after college. Because I think it's a good primer for anyone wanting to start out. And what the kids love about it is that it's short. It's only 100 pages. So,
well, I am a proud owner of the book. I just started flipping through it last night. So, looking forward to finishing it. And I certainly enjoyed the conversation with you today, John.
Sure, my pleasure. Oh, and then again, I write a monthly real estate column for the Registry magazine in San Francisco. You can go to the Registry magazine. I think it says Registry SF. Type in my name, the columns show up. Or you can go to our website, McNellis.com. And recent columns have been, pretty much this year, I've been focused on retail, the challenges that the Amazons of the world are bringing to retail. And retail and housing, I've been writing about a fair bit. And that's at McNellis.com. Guys, it's been a pleasure.
John, thank you so much for being with us today and giving us a little bit more wisdom.
I hope so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. And that was John McNellis, author, developer, and real estate entrepreneur. You definitely want to check out his book, Making It in Real Estate, Starting Out as a Developer. You can pick it up on Amazon. Stephen, thoughts?
Well, some of the statistics that John mentioned were amazing to me. We all see what's going on in retail, but when he spoke about United States being overbuilt with 50 square foot per person of retail compared to Europe that only has 2 to 3 square foot per person, that's amazing to me.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously the United States and the way it's built and how it's developed. It's built around the car, and it sort of lends itself to very spread out development with lots of opportunity like that. And obviously, the U.S. is very much of a consuming economy, but there's always deals to be found. I think that's really regardless of what you're in. I mean, John was, I don't want to say he was bullish or bearish on retail. He just was talking about some of the issues with retail that make it somewhat challenging, and he's cautious. But there's always deals. I don't care what asset class you're in. There's always deals, and that's certainly one of the things that I took away from it. John is, even though he points out on the retail side that there are some issues and concerns, there's still here and there retail deals that he's doing, just not the 100,000 square foot drugstore, shopping center, bank, gas station deals. Those are the traditional, what you saw in the 70s that's probably gone, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Stephen, John was a terrific speaker. We've had individuals asking us about development and how we can get some more speakers talking about development. If they're looking for other types of speakers, where can they find that information?
The one place to go is to www.investfloridashow.com. That's our website. You can also download and listen to our podcasts on your mobile device, either from the Google or from Apple. We've got an encyclopedia of information over there and really good speakers, so you should enjoy it.
Guys, as always, we appreciate the time that you invest with us. And until next episode, hasta la vista.
You've just listened to the Invest Florida podcast with Eric Odom and Stephen Silverman. Join us every week for actionable real estate investment ideas, and of course, visit our website at www.investfloridashow.com for more shows and tips on how to earn a cash flow in the real estate market in Florida. While hosts and producers of the Invest Florida show have no reason to doubt the validity of comments of our guests, we do not warranty their accuracy. Please check with your legal, financial, and tax advisors before entering into any investment. Returns will vary from person to person and deal to deal based on unique circumstances. All information expressed in this show is for educational purposes only. Opinions of the guests are not necessarily shared by the hosts and producers of the Invest Florida show.